Hello, and welcome to our Success Stories webinar hosted by GoLean6Sigma.com. My name is Tracy O'Rourke. I'm Managing Partner and Executive Advisor at GoLean6Sigma.com. We are very excited to have this offering for our audience because this is where the rubber meets the road. This is when we talk about real process improvement projects that have been implemented, and we want to share those stories with you. So today we're highlighting an awesome project from UC Davis, presented today by Hampton Sublett. How are you today, Hampton?
Doing great, Tracy.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and I'm really excited to share your project. So before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Hampton. Hampton is the director of the Office of Strategic Solutions at UC Davis. In this role, he's responsible for overseeing project portfolios that directly impact long-term financial sustainability of UC Davis. To date, almost $3 million a year in hard savings has been generated. That's awesome. And the goal by 2023 is to generate 20 million annually. And you say that is ahead of schedule. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great people at UC Davis that have been able to make a lot of these projects move faster than we typically would have otherwise.
That's exciting. So prior to accepting this role, Hampton was appointed by an associate chancellor to help lead a 2-year initiative aimed at driving improvements in university central administration. Hampton has also earned a master's in business from the University of San Francisco and a Bachelor of Science in Communication from Boston University. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Hampton. What do you do for fun?
When I'm not having fun at work, I'd like to have more fun with my family, typically traveling wherever we can possibly get to, whether it's abroad or just hiking in the Sierra Mountains. Sometimes I do play golf, love to barbecue, and I've tried to get into running, although it's not exactly what I would call fun.
I know, I feel the same way about running. It's effective, but it's not fun.
It's efficient.
It's efficient, that's right. So you recently just went through UC San Diego Extension's Greenbelt program. This was actually your project, and I'm happy to say that you were voted best in class by your peers for this project. So that's pretty exciting. What did you think about the program?
I thoroughly enjoyed the program. In fact, so much so that I've signed on to do the Black Belt program with UC San Diego Extension. What I really found most impactful, I would say, specifically about the Greenbelt, was that you do have to do a project. So you have to take these principles that you learned from the class and learn how to actually apply them. And so with your tutelage and frankly from the cohort that you go through the program with, you're able to rely on or pull from knowledge from your peers to help you get through the program and come out with meaningful results. I think the return on investment for our own university for me to go through this program is, I think you'll see, is more than adequate.
Very exciting. And so did you just pass your exam for your black belt too?
I have, and I have yet another project due in early June, and hopefully, well, when upon completion of that, then I should be a certified black belt.
Very nice. All right, and we'll look forward to another success story.
I hope so.
Well, I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can go ahead and walk us through your presentation, and don't forget to show us the slide with your picture.
All right, very good. There we go. All right, so enough about me. Let's move on. All right, so this project was called, internally anyway, we called it Increasing Wrench Time at UC Davis. That term wrench time really is just meant to talk about tradespeople doing trades work. This project was predominantly focused on trying to keep those well-skilled and folks that are doing the good work of trying to keep our buildings up and running, keep them actually in the field doing the work that they like to do and that they're best at, rather than driving around campus trying to get parts that they need, spend time pulling parts out of the warehouse. So that was the real core focus of this particular project. So what I thought I might do is, because we do have some jargon at UC Davis that may not be applicable to either all fields or to your businesses out there, I want to walk you through some of our key terms for this project. So wrench time, as I was just saying, it's basically the time a tradesperson is spent doing their value-added work. So again, not driving, but rather doing stuff that they were trained to do. You'll hear this term location 3, or I guess see this term as well. Location 3 is our UC Davis on-site warehouse. We'll talk about parts that are in stock. That means the parts that are stored at location 3. And you'll also hear the term non-stock. Those are parts that we order from vendors that don't get put on a shelf effectively. So moving on, we do have what's called at our place a siloed culture. I don't think we're the only ones. I do work in higher ed and with a lot of my peers, and even though we are an ag school, the silo seems to actually permeate many different types of campuses. So what I mean there is that many of our different business units function almost as though they're independent units, and they don't necessarily have the time or wherewithal to find opportunities to collaborate and try and reduce I'll call it the friction points, or they don't necessarily know how or where to apply the oil to get the gears turning a little bit smoother. You also hear the term IPE. This is an inspector, planner, estimator. But for the intents of this particular presentation, you can consider them sort of a detailed project manager, a technical project manager. And then this term pulling parts. So this is the time spent at the warehouse, literally walking the aisles. So imagine you can put yourself in Home Depot as you walk aisle to aisle, trying to find exactly the parts you need, putting them in your basket, proverbial or otherwise, and then leaving the facility. So we'll talk about drive time and pulling of parts. So I think that should get you pretty much ready to hear the deck. So I'm going to move on to one of our intro slides. So we're going to go through the DMAIC process. Of course, anyone who's spent any time with Lean Six Sigma is clearly aware of the DMAIC process, but so I'll use these slides to do transitions as we go through each one of these phases. So we're going to start with the define phase. Here's the project charter, and it's a lot of information on here, and I'll certainly try not to bore you with reading it all to you, but I'll hit on some of the key elements. Basically, our campus is comprised of over 1,000 buildings spread out across Northern California, not just centrally located within Davis, but Sacramento, Tahoe, and Bodega Bay even. And what we're trying to do here is, of course, keep our tradespeople in the field doing their trades work. So can we, in fact, do more with the same amount of resources? So as you look at the business case and the benefits, what we hope to be able to do is reduce the cost of each job for each customer, because the tradespeople are not spent in transit, but rather focused on getting the job at hand done, making sure that they have all the parts when they need them at the start of the job. As well, we hope to increase the number of jobs that get done. Around many higher ed universities, you run into a problem of what's called deferred maintenance. Basically, you keep putting off the maintenance of these buildings for other work, other priorities, and at some point your buildings get into a state of almost disrepair. So we're trying to avoid that, and we will, by increasing the number of jobs we can do each year, that really helps us make sure that our facilities are of top notch, on par with our academia. So our goal here was to increase wrench time by 5%. That seems like a modest goal, but this was meant to be a very narrow scope. I think you'll see it near the end of the slide deck that we have other ideas as to how to increase it further. But one of the key things that you need to do within any Lean Six Sigma project is really be careful not to expand your scope beyond what you can control. So we were very deliberate about making sure that we focus just on a small element of this of the entire life cycle of projects getting completed around campus. So that's pretty much the interesting elements. You can see the team members here who really made this a possibility, and it was their creativity, their hard work, and their constant ideas and willingness to try something new that made this a success. Now, again, for those of you familiar with the DMAIC process, the SIPOC is one of the primary ways to look at the high-level process. In fact, Tracy, you might recall me asking, why do we have to do a SIPOC when we're going to be doing detailed workflow analysis, whether it be swim lanes or value stream maps? And Tracy was reminding me that not everybody knows exactly what this process is. So to take them too deep into the details, you might lose them. So a SIPOC is a good way to make sure that everybody is on the same page. In this particular scenario, we've got a number of different suppliers, and I would put that in air quotes because even in some cases our customers are the suppliers. The example being, of course, that they have to submit a request to have an improvement made to a particular office or building. And then we have the IPEs I mentioned before, and you can see the rest of them. But I want to really focus just on the process flow, just to kind of give you that high level overview of what it is we're going to be taking a deeper dive into. So at the location 3 currently places orders for non-stock parts from vendors. The parts then come into location 3 by delivery truck, of course, and then 70% of them, of the parts, are delivered to the IPE office, while the remaining 30% stay in stock. This was an intentional, deliberate move, perhaps even maybe a year or two ago, because the IPE wanted to ensure that all the parts needed for the jobs that he was running, he had direct oversight and control over, so that he could make sure that the jobs would start on time and that there would be no lag for parts. However, you'll see later on that it was interesting that we identified that extra motion as, and transportation, I should say, as something that we wanted to try and find a better way to improve. So then as we move further down, I'll try and use my mouse here to kind of show you where I am. Here we are. The electrician then, before the start of the job, goes to pick up their 30% to get 100% in total, and then drives out to the job site where they effectively complete their work and the job is completed. So what we're focusing on is this non-value add. So activities that are happening that have no direct immediate benefit to the end user, to the customer, if you will. All right. So, Ellen, what we learned here is you can see the key takeaway, that parts were being stored in multiple locations. This was actually an aha moment, if you will.
You said it was an aha moment because you just didn't know that was a discovery of doing this project, that's when you discovered it, correct?
Yeah, in fact, I thought all stock parts were in the location 3 warehouse, not actually being taken, some portion of them being taken to the IP's office.
Okay, good.
So I'm not going to walk you through every waking detail of this, but as you can see, this is a pretty busy chart when it's really starts with the customer saying, hey, I would like to have my office renovated, to the time that the electrician actually shows up with the parts to break ground. So this is everything leading up to the work actually beginning. That's an important piece to focus on. So one of the slides that we had in our Greenbelt training, I thought was reminded me of our workflow. So this was the slide where you have perhaps a little bit over engineering or over time, additional extra steps added. So I thought that was we got a good chuckle out of that when I shared it with the team.
Yes, we did.
And so now we're going to move on to the measure. So we think that there's a problem, and we want to now try and identify what does it really look like. So what did this really call for? This called for Delta Force. Now, just to have a little fun, we named our team Delta Force just to poke fun at that we're really not solving the bigger problems of the world, but just to kind of create some camaraderie. So those in this photo, I don't know who they are, but thank them for their support and their work. Okay, so Delta Force really was comprised of the folks that are doing the work. We're talking about the folks in the location 3 warehouse, including the supervisor, as well as the electrician and his chain of command and the project manager. Now, bear in mind, I was the new person to this group. They have worked together over the last year or so, but they themselves are going through the transition of moving from one unit called facilities into now facilities and supply chain management. So they are effectively in 2 separate units. And this is really all about the partnership, about bringing these folks together to try something new and kind of break out of this mold. And so we had to focus and ensure that we had open and honest communication. This was probably no more important than to make sure that I myself am being very transparent about what it is we're trying to do, how this will benefit not only themselves, but the larger university. And we really talked about this willingness to try new approaches. As Tracy told us during the Greenbelt training, and it played out during our project, you're going to come up with ideas that are probably one step better, but as you go through the process and project, you're going to realize that you can continuously improve even on those improvements. So we had several different examples, one of which I'll hit on when we show you the next workflow, but where we just iterated continuously to try and improve the end result. All right, so benefits must be for the organization. They can't be for one person. I think this is where we ran into trouble in the past, meaning before this project started, where if one person could potentially do 10 minutes of extra work on their end before they hand it off to the next group, that could potentially save maybe an hour's worth of work downstream. And we didn't want, or I imagine rather, that folks didn't want to seem selfish to say, hey, can you do 10 more minutes worth of work so you can save me an hour? When in fact, that's exactly what we need to be looking at when we think of the big picture. So we put that out at the outset. Listen, don't worry about what your solutions are that we're going to iterate through, even if it means less work for you and more work for someone else. If the net is a total savings, then that's what we need to go for. All right, communications. So we had weekly meetings. During those weekly meetings, we talked about what's working and what's not. So as I was talking about, we iterate through it. Certainly, certain things that we thought would work didn't work as well as we had tried, and so that we would try something new, getting to that new approaches. And then we said that we had to continuously have collaboration with respect to this brainstorm. It can't be one or two people just hogging the microphone, if you will. And then we also wanted to focus on constant communication, just ensuring that the entire team, albeit small, was completely aware of everything that was going on. So we started a group email thread. We even started a text thread. So it was very easy for someone to notify the entire group if something had come up that needed addressing. And then, of course, you could have individual communications with one of your team members if it turned out that it was just something between the two of you and it didn't need to distract everybody. All right, when it comes to the data collection plan, it was rather simple. In fact, this entire project was rather simple, and that's kind of one of the beauties of it, and the Lean Six Sigma process, if you follow it with a deliberate approach. So both of our data types were continuous and variable. So the first one was talking about that transit time, that drive time. So we have a large campus, and we also have gates across our campus because we need to make sure that we don't have the general public driving through for the safety of our students. Well, these gates open and close only during times where students are not likely to be in transit. So we have to make sure that we're maximizing our time of moving across campus. Furthermore, we also talked about the time spent pulling those parts. Again, that's walking that Home Depot aisle, if you will, but of course our warehouse. Okay, so first I'm going to talk to you about the time spent pulling the parts at location 3 at our warehouse. So what this graph aims to show is that you've got the number of visits to location 3 over an 11-day period. So this is the total number of visits and how long each visit was. So you can see that the median here was about 4 minutes, many of which happening, in fact, 65% of which actually happened within the first 5 or within only 5 minutes. And then subsequent trips or other trips, if you will, spread out upwards of 60 minutes with one major outlier at 50 minutes. And one of the interesting things here is, even though my question to the team is sort of, what was the cause of these return visits, and we're digging further into that reason in terms of whether the parts were broken or missing or whatnot, it still doesn't change the fact that every one of these trips, even if it is for a few minutes, it doesn't account for the drive time and the parking time and the transit. So if we can eliminate these trips altogether, we really get some serious savings with respect to the drive time. Okay, now drive time. Here's the spaghetti map that talks about the transit. All right, what I've tried to do here is number them 1 through 7. So, and I only used the 2 different colors because you ended up having almost 4 lines next to each other, and then that could get a little confusing. But here is the electrician's home shop. So effectively, the electrician arrives here at work, gets in their truck. Then they drive to location 3, pick up their parts. So there's transit time, about 3 minutes on average. Then there's shopping time at location 3, 4 minutes. Then they walk over to the IPE office. Remember, that's where 70% of the stock was. So they grab the parts there. Then they drive out to job site number 1. So this is when the value add work really begins. So the customer sort of is finally able to experience the value. And then, of course, they have debris from doing their job. They drive that back to the electrician shop and drop off their garbage, only to go back to location 3 to get parts for the next job. Again, this is I'm not sure if I say this is only 1 day's worth of work. So if you will, in the afternoon, they drive to location 3, pick up their parts, they go out to the job and then back. So a total of all of that time together is about 50 minutes of what we are calling non-value add time. Now, on to analyze. So what does this all mean? Okay, so you remember that the swim lane diagram from before. This is the exact same diagram, but with areas where we thought we could improve. So we did notice that even though this was out of scope, we did notice that we were visiting with the customers more often than we had originally intended. So we found a way to eliminate one of those steps. Plus, as we talked about, the 70% of the parts getting taken and stored at the IP location instead of at the warehouse. And then we found ways to eliminate the need for the electrician to actually come to the warehouse and gather all of their parts. So we're going to talk about that solution here in a second. All right, when trying to figure out the root cause of why this is happening, we broke it into these four main categories, I should say. So all of these are decreasing wrench time, of course, the goal being to increase wrench time. When looking at non-utilized talent, this is where we have location 3 staff that are not being utilized to potentially help with delivery of parts. And perhaps one of the reasons for that was actually this lack of trust because they haven't ever asked them to do that. And we're talking about people who are having to engage directly with the customer, meaning the electricians show up at the customer site. If they're missing parts or had defective parts because of this potential lack of trust, then they don't want to have that experience, and they're trying to provide the best value to the customer. However, if we start by having these communications and building these teams and creating that collaboration and that understanding of what is truly needed, we can find ways to speed up the process. As I mentioned before, we noticed we had too many customer site visits, so I won't spend too much more time there. Excessive motion. So here, there's frankly a lack of visibility into how much motion was actually taking place. So once we did the spaghetti diagrams, even those that were doing the driving, the electricians, were rather surprised to see all of that motion just within a typical day. All right, and then excessive transportation. So this is where the goods and the parts, if you will, are being moved about the campus. So this is where, again, the IP was staging some of the parts at his office to ensure that they're ready for the electrician at the start of the job. But again, going back to that trust, if we can build that trust, that collaboration, then we can find ways to alleviate some of these steps. So root cause, hypothesis, and verification. So we basically said we thought that we're spending too much time pulling parts, and we were able to validate that through the data collection graph I just showed you with the histogram. And then here we're talking about the motion. We thought we're driving around campus too much, and we were able to validate that by the spaghetti diagram. And as I alluded to in one of the swim lane diagrams, we did discover that we're impacting the customer likely too many times before the job even begins. And even though we did validate that and said that it was true, it was out of scope. It brings me all the way back to discussing the charter at the beginning of this presentation, where using that charter to keep your scope tight is really important. So we really try to pull that charter out as often as need be to make sure that we didn't get too into the weeds. And the team held me accountable for doing that as well. All right, so looking at the Pareto chart, so this is the data for pulling parts at location 3. And we only focus, it's important also to mention that we focus on this electrical unit for a couple of different reasons. First off, we had some staff that were willing and able to definitely try something new. So we thought we had potential for a high success rate. We also had electricians often are working on planned work. So it's easier to make sure that we can go through a deliberate parts list and submit that parts order compared to, say, plumbing that might have a burst pipe or a toilet that's not working that needs an emergency part. So that's why we originally focused on the electricians. However, when looking at that 80%, right, so beauty of the Pareto chart to kind of show you where the majority of the issues are happening. So it turns out that if we were to try and take this concept of which we've only piloted within the electrical side, we would probably want to focus on these 4 groups and not so much these until we at least fine-tuned operations within these, because that's where the greatest value is. All right, on to improve. So this is one of my favorite tools within the Greenbelt training, where you talk about your various different potential solutions. So what we talked about was the two different, well, the first one was leveraging the location 3 warehouse staff that frankly bill at a much lower rate than our electricians. And currently right now actually are not part of our recharge model, meaning the customer does not actually pay for their time at the moment. And then we also, so we're talking about them driving parts to the electrician shop. I want to actually stop here for a second and highlight, this was an idea brought forth by the Location 3 supervisor, Eric Lovelace. When we were talking about how to improve the process, our original thought was, gosh, if we could get all the parts dropped off at the job sites, wouldn't that be helpful? And if you think back to the spaghetti diagram, that would actually mean that the Location 3 staff had to drive out to job site 1 and then out to job site 2 and then back. Not only is that additional extra motion, but that's also, it creates a logistical timing issue where your planning has to be really perfect in order to not waste anyone's time. Meaning if the electrician showed up 30 minutes early or the Location 3 person showed up 30 minutes late, that's just wasted time sitting there in waiting. So what Eric came up with was, how about we drop off, meaning Location 3, sorry, drop off the parts at the electrician shop so then the night before the parts are needed in a locked location, so that when the electrician shows up at work, he just loads those parts directly onto his truck, and from there he's got everything he needs for the entire day. And I say he only because our electrician in this particular pilot was Joe, but I imagine we either do or could have female electricians at some point. All right. Second one, and I'm not going to go through every one, but I do want to just hit on these two first ones. The IPE places orders for non-stock and stock parts. This is where it saves the electrician the need to go into the warehouse and start pulling parts. So the IPE can go out to the job site well before in the estimation phase and identify an entire list of parts that are needed. So you can order not only the non-stock, but also the stock, so that the Location 3 staff can get those parts and drive it. All right. What I love about this particular form is it gives you a great way to come up with a score for each one of your potential solutions and whether or not you're going to implement or not. Now, you'll notice right here, number 3 has an equally high score. And so one could say, well, why don't you just go ahead and implement that as well, because you're going to get an additional win. But we're trying to be very careful to maintain our scope. I guess I really can't stress this enough. We're not ignoring this long term. We're just momentarily putting it in a parking lot. So even though we've got several different other ideas that frankly we're in the midst of trying out right now as ways to expand this particular pilot, I really enjoyed how this form made it so easy to be able to see the value that is potentially created for each one, and has also helped us deprioritize solutions that we think may not be as valuable. Okay, future state. Now, I'm not going to waste your time walking through every different step, but if you recall, there were many more boxes. In fact, if I advance to the next slide, I'm going to take you back in time to the current state. Look at all of that movement. I'm going to bring you back to the future state. Okay, so we were able to eliminate 4, maybe even 5 steps, have much more of a streamlined process, and the electrician gets the parts with less motion, the parts are in transit less often, and you'll notice that the customer actually potentially will be affected less. All right, now let's go to the future state spaghetti map. Now, you may have remembered that there were 7 steps for a total of 50 minutes. Now we're down to 21. And why is that? So that is because the Location 3 staff, with all of the parts needed, once they're ready for a job, they drive them to the electrician's shop, as I mentioned before, the night before in a locked location. Therefore, when the electrician shows up, he drives out, grabs his parts, drives out to job 1, puts the garbage, you may recall, from that job site 1 back into his truck, drives to job site 2, does his second job for the day, and then returns. Now, what's much more likely is that we could probably add a third job because the amount of increased wrench time, right? So we could take that additional time that is currently spent in transit and or pulling parts to do a third or fourth job, depending on how complex. So we're able to eliminate 4 steps out of that process. So here's a little flashback in time to remind you how busy it used to look. So 30 minutes. What does 30 minutes really get you? Is it really that valuable? We would say that it is. Let me also, before we go into some of the financial or the detailed time analysis of it, I want to make sure that you understand that this is a very conservative estimate. We were very non-invasive with respect to our data collection. Wanted to make sure that the technicians did not feel as though they were under a complete microscope. But there is many times where they either parking and walking. It doesn't sound like a lot, but at some particular times, a time of day where the main parking lot for the location 3 is busy, they have to park maybe 5 minutes away. So there's additional time most likely added to this, but we try to be extremely conservative in our estimates. So what does this mean? This means that if for one electrician, we could save 30 minutes per day. Now, if you were to times that by 260 work days, that's 130 hours. That starts becoming meaningful. And then if you were to times that by 20 electricians, you now have 2,600 hours of time that we can repurpose into doing more projects. So we have that backlog of projects on campus, that deferred maintenance, or even some of the other work that isn't getting done as fast as potentially it could be. So this is an attempt to try and find ways that we can leverage our existing staff to do more. In tight budget times that many universities, especially public universities in the state of California, are experiencing, this is invaluable. Now, we're only talking about electricians during this entire pilot, but if we were to talk about the remaining trades and only roll this concept out to 50% of the remaining 176, we could potentially repurpose 11,440 hours. That is an amazing amount of time saved for a amazingly simple solution. So, wow,
that's impressive.
Look what 30 minutes can do. So and that's what I find when I look all around campus. I find units saying, oh, it's only a buck here or a minute there. But when you really try and find a way to quantify it into a meaningful number, you can see that it adds up to being something of real consequence. Now, on to control. How do we make sure that we don't slide backwards? So some do's and don'ts. I'll talk to you about those because I think these are important. Stay agile during your improve phase. Remember that I mentioned that earlier on, and this is something that Tracy really kind of talked to us about, but you're going to come up with solutions. Don't get wedded to those solutions. Don't fall in love with those solutions. Understand that you're constantly trying to iterate. That's the whole purpose of Lean Six Sigma, is this continuous improvement. And don't be afraid to do that even within your project. So it's this iterating reiterate the purpose, number 2. So that is, again, trying to keep yourself focused on what is important. And don't forget why you're doing this. So again, someone might say, yeah, it's only 30 minutes, but no, let's think of the big picture here. You want to protect that scope. I think I'll beat that one into the ground. And then open and honest communication is absolutely vital. If you don't have the trust of your colleagues, it would be amazing if you're able to accomplish much. So what happened here? With respect to hard savings, this project really wasn't trying to get hard savings. Several of our other projects within the Office of Strategic Solutions are focused on just that. And Tracy alluded to some of that earlier, but it's many times equally or at least very important to make sure that you do get those soft savings. So you may recall that our goal was 5%. We were happy to say that we did hit 6%. Again, only by implementing those 2 different solutions. If you go back to that solution page, there was at least 4 or 5 other potential solutions. I'm certain we could get to 10% without much trouble. So if we were to actually deploy the 50%, I apologize. What I actually should have mentioned was that the 11,440 hours, if we deployed to the 50% of the remaining techs, was in addition to what we can save within the electrician. So it's actually a much greater total of 14,000 hours, my mistake. So the positive impact on the external customers, sure enough, jobs will take less time to complete. So it means they can get back in their office space faster. They cost less to actually get done, and we can get more done. So a job that may have had to wait 6 months might call it 4 months or something along those lines anyway. We do have a lot of work to do on our campus. Yeah, so we just made sure that we got all the appropriate sign-offs and handoffs and executive summary. So this is just a brief synopsis for what I've just been talking about. But the best part was really that the team members that I showed you on one of the earlier slides, I believe it's the charter, the fact that they were able to see how much of a difference they could make by being empowered to try out their own solutions. I can't stress it enough that I was not the subject matter expert. I was merely a facilitator that helped follow a philosophy or a methodology that just leveraged their knowledge, their expertise. And so now here they are being able to be the ones responsible for making a real impact because they were trusted to do so. And so it's a huge testament to their own willingness to try, their own creativity, and frankly, upper management to create the space for this to actually happen. So that pretty much wraps up where I'm at. And so Tracy, do you want to handle the questions from here?
Yes, I will. So I will just say that I love your project. I think the fact that you spoke so much about the soft skills required to do a green belt is a testament to your approach and the success of your project. You mentioned a lot throughout this presentation, team dynamics and the importance of collaboration and ownership. And it was very clear that respect for the workers, for the electricians, was very important to to your project and the people on the team, and the fact that it really does make a difference. And so you spent a lot of time weaving that into your presentation, and I think that is a great testament and example of how projects should be run. So I really appreciate that. One of my favorite items in your project as well is you really shared the impact of shaving 30 minutes off of a process. And I actually agree with you. I think most people don't really take the time to think through the magnitude of doing something like that. Like, oh, it's only 30 minutes, not a big deal. But when you multiply that out by per day, by per technician, per year, and then to the other groups, that's huge. And so I really appreciate the fact that you were able to share that so succinctly as well. So I do have a few questions, and this is really just for our audience as well. What would you say was maybe your favorite or most impactful part of doing your first Greenbelt project?
I think this one is the easiest because I've spent 20 years doing project management and from like the PMBOK waterfall and agile. But I really think it comes down to empowerment of the team. And I mentioned the project management only because it's not to say that that is not a tenet or a hallmark of project management, but it's not one that I particularly stressed as much as I did during this particular project and what I felt Lean Six Sigma really stresses. So to see the look in the eyes of the people who have been doing this work and probably wanting to try something different or at least seeing that their opinion is valued. Obviously, we all have seen it. We are probably guilty of doing this sometimes, but pushing down the solutions that we in management think are the right solution without making sure that we've either validated or at least validated the employee's perspective, I think was truly one of the coolest parts of this entire project. And I kind of get to see the look on the team members' faces when we get to present this to other groups, and they're proud of the results as well they should be.
Great. So it's a great project, but my question is, did you run into any challenges or situations where you think you would have done something a little different?
So challenges for me have always been coming up with metrics. And in fact, I think you and I even had several conversations about it. And so, so many, well, I don't want to put words in anyone else's mouth, but certainly something I've struggled with, especially within higher ed, but also just within myself, is trying to find a way to quantify things. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to qualitatively say, oh, we think we did better, or everyone feels better. Well, that's all good and well, but one of the beauties and benefits of this structured approach is that it really pushes you to try and put a measurement against the improvements that you're seeking. And so by doing so, you can actually let the data and let the math speak for itself that ends up being so much more valuable when trying to give presentations to upper and executive management, because those are the folks that are, the ones that have to deal with the tight budget crunches, right? And have to make those really challenging decisions. And to be able to provide them with meaningful data that they can feel confident in because you followed a scientific method is by using metrics much more thoroughly in everything else that I do, I will be putting them in a better position to be able to make better decisions. So I struggled a little bit during this project about coming up with metrics and putting it in a meaningful context. That said, especially carrying on through the black belt, now I'm starting to see things all around me in terms of metrics. And again, I think it's really valuable, and it's probably one of my biggest takeaways from both the green and the black belt programs.
Wonderful. Well, I was just going to ask you, how has this class, both the green belt and black belt, affected the way you view things? So metrics is definitely one of those things, and it's great to hear that you actually can quantify things, even just looking at things and seeing those opportunities. Is there anything else that has affected how you look at things now that you've been through this course?
I'm not quite sure this is the answer you were expecting, but having been in project management for 20 plus years, and no need to put an exact number on that one, is the project charter for a project following the PMBOK methodology. It's there for a reason, absolutely, and it makes sure that you think through so many important details. But what I love about the charter style within Lean Six Sigma is that you can go through all of those other steps within the PMBOK charter, but then it forces you to distill the essence of what it is you're trying to accomplish into one particular document. And so I'm actually, I keep running into this topic in both inside my head as a running conversation, but also anytime I come in contact with any black belts who have project management backgrounds, to say it seems to me as though they are different, but don't get me wrong, they overlap. And I almost use this analogy like if project management were a black circle and Lean Six Sigma is a white circle, they definitely overlap to have a significant gray portion. And so I think you can borrow tools from each discipline to help you execute on whatever it is you actually need. And so I plan actually to start using the Lean Six Sigma charter as a way of distilling our thoughts, making sure that we're crystal clear, and it's a one page. I've written so many 20-page charters that never see the light of day after we first write it. And then you can't use it as a guidepost if no one's looking at it. A guidepost is only valuable if it's visible. Mm-hmm. And so, meaning literally you could slap it on the wall, or one page is a whole lot easier to refer back to than 20 when you're constantly in the throes of any project, whether it's Lean Six Sigma or a waterfall or agile.
Right. Well, good. That's very helpful. And I think we do get that question a lot. We do get a lot of project management folks into our green belt. And so I think it's valuable to hear your perspective of how at least the charters overlap and where they complement each other. Okay, last question is, do you have any advice for someone in education that is going to be embarking on their first Lean Six Sigma project?
Is this somebody who is looking for training or someone who has the training that is looking to kick off a project?
I'm gonna veer on the latter, which is application.
Application. Okay. I think it's important within the Lean Six Sigma projects to take a two-pronged approach. And I know that sounds probably cliche, but you need to sell upper management on the high level value add of what Lean Six Sigma can bring, so that ideally they are supportive, not to have them push it, but rather to let you work with the team. So you need to the one prong is to make sure that executive management, if they're not aware of what Lean Six Sigma is all about, what the value is, how it focuses on what the customer needs, you need to be able to succinctly make sure that they are at least agreeing or supportive of it. Again, they don't have to push it, because if they can just empower you to go work with the people who are actually doing the work, then that's where the second prong comes in. That's where you meet with the individuals who are responsible for the work. You give them almost like a yellow belt introduction to Lean Six Sigma, so that you can all get on the same page about the tools, They can understand why metrics are more important than a qualitative assessment. And then you once you get them on board and them buying in, of course, then you'll get the results that you want, and then that's even easier for for the executive to look at the end result to say, wow, that was really impactful. I'm willing and happy to do it again, and to the extent possible, hopefully even train up the staff beyond Yellow Belt.
Thank you for that advice. Very helpful. Let's go to the last slide.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm Tracy O'Rourke, and you're listening to the GoLean6Sigma.com success story webinar highlighting Hampton Sublet. Thank you for sharing your project with us today, Hampton. I loved hearing it. I'm very excited about what you've been able to do and your storyboard, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about your black belt as well.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to represent UC Davis. I'm just thrilled to see how much good work our entire campus is pushing forward on. And Tracy, you yourself were a tremendous leader, facilitator, mentor. I know I've reached out to you a couple times outside the project. I appreciate your help. And I can't stress not only your program, but those supported by the UC San Diego Extension program, where they emphasize doing a project, not just understanding the theoretical content within a condensed week and taking an exam. They do it over an intentional protracted schedule of approximately about 4 months, where you get some information, you get time to think about it, you get time to apply it, and then you come back and you get some more information, and it builds on itself to the point where you're applying what you're learning. And for me anyway, learning is all about doing. I don't think I'm in the minority there either. So I appreciate the structure and the approach.
Good. I'm really glad. I really like this structure and approach as well, because I agree with you. I think people learn best by doing, and just it can't just be an academic exercise. It really does need to be roll your sleeves up and apply it and see what happens. So thank you for sharing your project. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in today and joining us. So if you have any questions about this presentation or about how to apply Lean Six Sigma, just contact us, and don't forget to download any free tools and templates on our website too. So have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us. Have a great day, Hampton.
You as well, Trace. Thanks so much.